further delays, I would like to move to our next speaker, who has been an international working around the world, all the way from Korea to US and number of developing cities and nations around the world, Dr. Okan Gurel. Dr. Gurel, I have a question for you about the healthy cities, because you have been involved in the healthy cities for a number of years, from medical infrastructure and also from looking at it, what can be done by way of embedding smart cities principles, including data, into the cities. And the question I put it from us, how are smart cities evolving into smart, healthy cities, which is really the important point at this era during the COVID. So Dr. Okan Gurel, over to you, sir.
Can you hear me, Dr. Dubé?
We can hear you, sir. Please go ahead. Did you hear the question?
Yes. So I know we're running short on time. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here, and I've enjoyed and learned a lot from the other presentations. I'm going to talk about one potentially controversial idea and its implication for cities. The controversial idea is that COVID is not going to go away in the foreseeable future. In fact, it may very well be like the flu, which does have a vaccine, may very well be endemic. Of course, hopefully at a lower level, and Dr. Jerome Kim talked about the vaccines very eloquently, and so certainly we will see improvements. But there is a very real possibility that this will continue to be a problem. And I think the one implication of that, Dr. Professor Lee of Seoul City talked about, of course, some of the great initiatives in Seoul to address the pandemic specifically. But what I will talk about is what you mentioned about health monitoring. So one very interesting aspect of COVID is that unlike the flu and several other infectious diseases, it seems to have a peculiar impact on people with cardiac conditions, hypertension, obesity, in other words, lifestyle conditions. And these usually, of course, in a healthcare system, they're preventative measures because people may die 10 years from now, they may die 15 years from now from obesity or hypertension, or maybe even longer term. In other words, these lifestyle conditions, even though prevention is highly desirable, are actually quite long-term. But what COVID does is it creates, I'm sorry, I'm outside for a second. What COVID does is it transforms these very long-term conditions into potentially very near-term or acute risk. And that's very interesting because a lot of insurance companies or smart cities, they want to create data, they want to create exercise opportunities, lifestyle, air pollution, all these factors to minimize those long-term impacts. But COVID changes that into short-term impacts. So I think there is an even greater imperative on the smart cities to address these other health issues, not because their citizens will suffer many years from now, but because they may very well suffer in the near term because of COVID. I think that's a very significant implication. So that has a lot of implications for IoT. It has a lot of implications for making cities walkable. In other words, it increases the, as we say in business, value proposition, or increases the importance of these measures. So I think that's very important. The last statement I'll give, because we're very short on time, is, and Professor Dr. Jerome Kim may comment, is in Seoul, in Korea, we did a massive influenza vaccination program. And there were about 50 or 60 deaths that were concerning, maybe even more, I think it was about 85, that some were worried were associated with the vaccine. Now, this has not been validated, but I think it has been felt in forensic analysis that those deaths were not due to the vaccine. So everyone was wondering about this. But if you look very interestingly, we have an air pollution problem in Seoul. And around the same time as the vaccines were being rolled out, the weather got colder, the pollution got markedly worse, economic activity, whatever the reasons may be. In other words, these sort of data, of health data, uh, can be very important to health status of the citizens. And I'm not saying that this is in particular this case right in this situation, but cities that can collect this data, can anticipate it, is very important for the health of their citizens. And as I said, COVID being potentially long-term, even more important than before, not just because of COVID, but because of these other conditions that are adversely affected by COVID.
Dr. Oran, thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving us some
Thank you.
insights. And I want to close this session with a note of hope with Dr. Kim provided it to us. Jeremy was very eloquent to say there is a hope which is happening. And what we see from Cambridge, from Scotland, from Seoul, from Sydney, from Nairobi,